something, or am I straight in? I thought you were. I thought you were doing an introduction.
Over to you, Mark. There we go. You're introduced.
Nearly then. Okay, absolutely. All right. Sorry about that. We should have practiced this earlier, shouldn't we? This is seamless.
Absolutely.
Guys.
It's live. It's seamless, and we're off.
Yeah. I've just been watching the BBC. They're having the same problems with the delay, but here we go. All right. I'm gonna share a presentation with you. So just bear with me a second. Okay. Of course, then you've got to find the one you want. Here it is. So I'm hoping that you see a picture of what is, I understand, thank you, I've got the thumbs up from Charlie. That's Segro Park, or what it will look like, apparently, according to the internet, because everything's true on the internet, isn't it? Absolutely, of course it is. I think I met most of you last week. I'm making that assumption, although I'm reliably informed that there are some additional people on the session today that may not have attended last week's session. So very, very briefly, my name's Neil Basson. I don't have a slide on this. I had one last week, so there we are. My company is Bid Perfect, and we have been engaged to support Brandrin Business Consultancy and Hillingdon Chamber to give you some tips and tricks and techniques on how to write a winning bid, hence the name of the presentation, Bidding to Win. As I said, this is part 2, which is, it's described as intermediate, but it's a continuation really of where we left off last week. So even if you weren't here, I'm going to give you a quick reminder, which hopefully will point things in the right direction for today. Again, we've only got limited time. I'm going to try and finish, if I can, a bit before 10 o'clock, because Nowzar has some important information for you, and I don't want to steal his thunder, so he can go into that later. So in last week's session, we looked at a number of factors. Firstly, we spoke about, and I gave you some examples of why organisations go to tender and what is it that they're looking for in a potential provider. And the kind of reason behind that is, if it takes you effort and time and resource, and therefore money, to write your proposal, to write your bid, the same is true at the client end, isn't it? They don't wake up in the morning and think, right, I'm going to go to tender. There has to be a plan. There has to be resource applied to write that invitation to tender. So if we can get our mind into the mind of the client, if we can look at things from their perspective, we can be more empathetic in our approach. One thing, for example, as a result of the tender, is that they're looking to minimise risk or reduce risk of things going wrong. So if we can bear that in mind as part of our response, then we, as I said, be looking at things from their perspective, not just through our own eyes, which can be powerful, emotionally powerful. We looked at what are the basics of a response. So that involves essentially ticking the right boxes. It involves responding to some basic questions in a questionnaire. It requires you to provide whatever information, documentation you have been asked for. And by that, I mean there might be a requirement to provide policies, for example, to provide some financial information like accounts, and probably to provide some references. There might be some, in a public sector tender, there will be a requirement to sign certain forms as well, not so much in the commercial side of things. But the direction in which I ask you to head is to adhere to whatever rules, whatever instructions you have been given, and to comply with those instructions. If you don't comply, then you have the possibility of being thrown out from the process, and you'll have spent a lot of time, or some time, putting your response together for zero return. And we also looked at understanding questions and objectives, questions within the invitation to tender itself, and how we analyse the question and how we break down a question so that we are in the best frame of mind to respond to it, and how we can then create the structure for our answer. Because an evaluator, and that's the person that's receiving your bid and looking through it and looking for certain facts and factors within your response and providing a score. They're looking for certain things within your answer. And if it conforms to their question, if your answer conforms to the structure of the question, then again, you're going to be in a better place. We also looked at my recommendation to consider the broader picture. So what are the more strategic, if you like, objectives of the organisation, and what's the current state of play, and where are they looking to head in the future? And the recommendation there was to conduct some research around that, so you can write a bid that's more informed, makes you look like you're more switched on as an organisation. So what I said we were going to cover over the course of the 2 sessions were these principal elements, and at the core, and let's not forget that pricing is important. I said that's not something that we're going to discuss because you're all different businesses, pricing things in different ways, but nevertheless it's important to have the right price, in inverted commas. The right price doesn't necessarily have to be the lowest price, because you can overcome a higher price with a better quality value-based submission. The document, the exercise, the tender is weighted normally, so there will be a certain amount of weighting based on the price, and there'll be a certain amount of weighting based on the quality of the submission. And again, you should look for the instructions relating to that in the bid documentation. I also said I'd give you half a dozen golden rules, and we started that last week, and we'll continue that journey today. So to start at the top, these are the things that we've already looked at, a couple of things here. So as I've said, we need to directly answer the question, and according to the structure of the question and according to the evaluation criteria, which they should publish. And if you can't find that in the bid documentation, then you should ask the question about how they're going to evaluate the responses. And we need to understand we need to have a specific understanding of the requirements of the project, i.e. the tender, and we need to have a broader understanding of the bigger objectives, if you like, coming from our research. Our solution, our approach, the way we conduct the work needs to come across as credible. Our organisation is credible, and we are competent, we are capable to deliver. Number 4 is that there has to be...
just wanted to keep it high level, but...
Number 4, sorry, I don't think that was a question for me, so I'll continue for the time being. Number 4 is that there must be something in it for the client. There must be benefits. Their organisation would need to be improved or increased or reduced, or they must make a saving or a gain in some way. And again, that's something that we'll be looking at later. We need to supply some kind of evidence to support our argument, to make our case more convincing and again more credible. And lastly, our style of writing. Our style of writing should not be complicated. Our style of writing should be easy to understand. It should be precise and it should be clear. So for today's session, having covered the first 2 elements last week, we're going to look at some examples of each of the 4 that you see in the red squares there. So the first golden rule of today is this one. Solutions that are well planned, comprehensive and innovative will demonstrate competence and build belief. Solution is a word that is, to be frank, although I'm going to talk about not using cliches a bit later, has become a little cliched. But in fact, there's no other word in the English language that means the same thing. You could say your solution is how you're going to do the work, how you're going to deliver the work. In fact, that leads me very neatly onto the next slide, because in order to answer the how question, we have to consider the 5 other elements of what are described as Kipling's 6. Now, I'm not going to go into that, okay, in terms of Kipling's 6. If you want to, if you're interested, Google it. It's a poem that Rudyard Kipling came up with many moons ago, okay. But we can cover, providing we cover each of the element of Kipling's 6, which you see on the screen here today, we will be writing a more comprehensive, complete bid. So we have to describe how we are going to deliver the work, as I have said. And in order to create that description, in order to create the content, the narrative that goes into the submission, we have to cover the remaining 5 elements. So in terms of who, what personnel, now you might be a very small business, there might be just one person in your business. In other businesses, they might be a bit larger. In some cases, you might be working with partners or subcontractors, for example. whoever is going to be involved in the project, relevant to the requirement that we're responding to, make sure that you include that information. Be as specific as possible. If you can name those individuals and confirm who actually owns that element of the process as well, even better. We have to describe what it is that we're going to do. Now here, if you're involved in selling products, obviously you're going to describe those products that are relevant to the requirement. If you're delivering services, then the same thing applies, but you're going to talk about your services. You might talk about materials, you might talk about tools. Certainly, I guess if some of you, as I expect will be on this call, are involved in the construction business, then those elements may well be appropriate. SLAs, service level agreements. So what standards will we adhere to when we deliver our services? And the more detailed, the more specific we can be in each of these areas, then the more comprehensive our bid and the higher the marks that we are likely to achieve from the evaluator. If time is important, if frequency is important, then we've got to go and cover the when element. So scheduling, frequency, dates, deliverables, milestones, project plan, they're all going to be appropriate when we consider when. If geography, location is important, then of course we have to discuss the why, sorry, not the why, the where people are based, where the client is based, where we're based in relation to the client. For example, we can talk about that or write about that in our narrative, but it might be appropriate to include a map that shows your location and their location, for example, if a close proximity is something that you consider to be an advantage. And lastly, it's about justifying why we've decided to take this approach, because there may be a number of different ways of delivering the service or the products, but if we explain our rationale, again, it looks like we've thought things through in more detail. We've been more, what's the word? We've been professional in our approach. We've been circumspect. We've thought about all the kind of ramifications of what's going on and what's likely to go on. And also, the why leads very neatly into the next part of what we need to get across to the client, which is linked to evidence and linked to our value proposition as well. So in terms of the way that we're going to work, yes, how is the kind of overarching element, but how is answered by then considering the other 5 criteria. Who's going to be involved? What is it we're going to do? When are we going to do it? Where is it going to happen if location is important? And why have we chosen to do it in this way? So if you tick off those boxes, as I've said, you're going to write a more complete bid. One consideration that we should also take is what makes us stand out from the crowd? What makes your organisation, the way you do things, better than your competition? Because in any all sectors, all services these days are competitive. So you all know what USP is, I'm sure. That is a unique selling point. You might not have come across an ISP before. An ISP is an innovative selling point. But the thing with unique is it's generally used too casually. You switch on the news and you hear people talk about being a bit unique or partially unique. Well, according to the dictionary definition, you can't be a bit unique or partially unique because there's only one of them. It's binary. It's a 1 or a 0. It's like being a bit dead. You can't be a bit dead. It's one or the other. Now, I'm going to kind of contradict that a little bit because I'm going to say that you can be unique based on a given set of factors. Innovation, again, is important, as I've said. If you're the first to do something, it may well have been copied, but you perhaps would be considered to be a leader in that way of working because you were the first to do it. So we can overcome a lack of uniqueness by being innovative, by doing something different. And that something different may well be a link to a standard way of doing business. So, for example, in what it is that you do, if you're involved in the construction business, everyone has to conduct, or everyone should conduct, health and safety training, health and safety awareness for our staff. So it's not the fact that you deliver health and safety training that makes your proposition innovative or unique. It might be something about the way you go about it. So do you invest more, for example, in health and safety? Do you deliver your training both in the classroom, and do you have maybe an e-learning module that your staff can take to understand more greater detail about health and safety? Are you investing more money in that area? Are you accredited to a certain standard? I think the ISO accreditation for health and safety is 18001, if my memory is correct. These may well create what we call discrimination or discriminators. Now, that's normally a negative word, isn't it, in the English language? But in bidding, we want the client or the prospective client to positively discriminate in our favour. So even if we're delivering a standard business kind of proposition, health and safety being the example, maybe it's the way we go about it, as per the examples I've given you, that make us stand out from the crowd, that make our proposition better, so different and better to our competition. So always think, how can I, where have I got the edge on my competition? How am I going to get that across in my proposal? That's really important to try and, as I've said, be the difference, if you like, positive difference. Again, going back to the principal elements of the winning bid, we've got to answer what is typically described as the so what question. Yes, we describe to the client how we're going to carry out the work, i.e. our solution. We then need to confirm what's in it for them, which answers the so what question. We need to understand, they need to understand the benefits that are available to them. How will their organisation, how will their business will become better as a result of working with us? How will they improve in some way? What would be a positive increase, for example? How might they get something that they haven't got at the moment? And maybe that's something, as per the previous slide, might be a unique or innovative part of our proposition as well. So in explaining our way of working, i.e. our solution, we then need to add on to the end of that how, as I said, they're going to be made better. So are we going to save time? Then that would be a business benefit, wouldn't it, to any organisation? Are we going to be able to reduce cost in some way in what we do? Perhaps are they going to receive an increase in productivity? Or would their image be made better as a result? Or perhaps will the quality of what we're doing be better than something that they've been used to, either from doing it with their own staff internally, or perhaps working with a competitor. So all of the time, we should be thinking of how what we do will make them better. That's the kind of link that typically gets missed out. An organisation spends a lot of time talking about itself, which is fine to a degree because you've been asked the question, but then more importantly, you've got to describe what it is, what that thing about you and how that makes your customer better. There's a linking statement which I'm going to give you. So let's assume that we're talking about, I'm going to pick something very generic, flexibility, okay? Because everyone these days, every business claims to be flexible. So your statement is, okay, Mr. Client, we want to work with you and we're a very flexible business. Now you can leave it there, but that's kind of a so what statement because it leaves the client a little bit in the dark about, well, in what way are they flexible and what does that flexibility mean to me? So that's the kind of linking statement. Mr. Client, we're a flexible business, which means to you. And after the which means to you, you've got to consider any of the options that you see on the screen here as examples. You've got to consider improvements, increases, reductions, savings, and gains, okay? And that makes for a more compelling proposition, which is where you need to be. Now, when we're talking about benefits, i.e. increases, improvements, reductions, savings, and gains, we need to consider something else. In fact, two things attaching to them. The first is, can we measure those outcomes? Can we measure an increase? Can we measure an improvement? Can we measure a reduction? If we can do that, then we can produce a quantity, can't we? We can quantify through that measurement. And if we've got a quantity, then we have got within our proposition for the client a greater perception of value. It's okay saying we're going to save you money by whatever process we are going to apply, but the question might well come back to you, well, how much? So if we've got a method for measuring and quantifying, it creates a more tangible, compelling proposition for them. I appreciate there are some factors that you can't measure. Maybe there's some of the softer benefits, but the harder sort of benefits in terms of cost and time, then absolutely you should be looking for some kind of measurement, quantification, and therefore value. And the second thing that I said that you would need to attach, bear with me a second, is to make your whole proposition, so both in terms of the way you work and in terms of the benefits for the client, a more believable proposition. And with that, in that respect, we are required to provide evidence. Now, you'll always be, well, in 99 times out of 100, you'll be asked for references, and references are a form of evidence, assuming that they're taken up and assuming that the referee that you provided is going to give a good opinion of working with your business. If you think of fingerprints will be used in a court of law, for example, and the prosecution's job in a court case is to prove the expression is beyond reasonable doubt, isn't it? Now, it's unlikely you're going to use fingerprints in a bid, but there are lots of different ways, lots of different types of evidence that you should be able to prove your case in the eyes of the jury, which is the evaluator, beyond reasonable doubt. So just have a short moment, a very short moment, to consider how you might go about that. I've given you one example of evidence, which is references, but there are other types of information and sources that you can use to make your case more believable, to bring veracity, there's a good word of the day there, to your argument, some of which you will perhaps create yourself. In other cases, there may be forms of evidence available outside of your organisation. So now you've had a minute or two to think about that, I'll give you the answers. So there are a number of classifications, different types or categories of evidence. And here is the first one. The first one is what we call objective evidence. Now, we call it objective evidence because it's objective. It does what it says on the tin. It is produced either outside of your organisation or it is accumulated with input, let's say, outside of your organisation, even though you may have been involved in that process as well. I'll give you some examples right here. So if you are accredited, now the standard I mentioned before was an ISO standard, 18001, health and safety. If you receive that accreditation, if you get that stamp, if you like, of approval, then that has to come, if you look at the next one down, that has to come through an audit, doesn't it? So, and the auditor that comes to you has no interest in your organisation or your business or its levels of success. All they're interested in is, do you conform to the correct criteria to receive the accreditation? And that ISO standard is obviously, it's international. And it is well accepted, if you like, as being the kind of benchmark for whatever factor that we're talking about, health and safety, quality, environment, or whatever. So it's a good thing to have. Not too many smaller businesses have them, but certainly if you're a larger business, it's kind of a prerequisite these days. But it's a good form of, a good example of objective evidence. If you've got a customer survey or someone has conducted a customer survey on your business and you've not been involved with the creation of that survey or paying anyone to complete it, then again, that will be another form of objective, or third party is another word, evidence. If the client, and when I say the client, I'm talking about an organisation that you're bidding to. Okay, that might be someone that you've done business with. It might be a completely new business to you, but let's use that overarching term, client. If the client is able to see it for themselves, i.e. through what we call a proof of concept, through some form of trial or demonstration or evaluation or pilot type arrangement period, then it's down to them to say, yes, we agree with you, or no, we don't. So they can be objective about that process. If we've collected a testimonial, now we've asked for that testimonial. We've gone to an existing client and asked for the testimonial, but one assumes that the words they've written in that testimonial are objective about, again, their views on working with you. And we'd include that in our bid to support, again, the claims that we're making. References we've spoken about. If you've won an award and that award has been given by an entirely independent body, or if someone has written something nice, in inverted commas, in the press about you, and you've not been involved in that production of that article, again, that's objective evidence. A site visit can go one of two ways. A site visit either means you've taken your prospective client to another client's location, and again, they've seen how you work with that client with their own eyes, or you've taken them to your own location, if that's appropriate, depending upon, essentially what it is that you're selling. But again, the client makes up their own mind, forms their own opinion. Financial guarantee is something that you do internally, but it's kind of putting your money where your mouth is. So it's saying, Mr. Client, X will happen, and if X doesn't happen, then we will have to pay a penalty as a result. So typically that will be included to be that would be considered, I should say, to be a stronger form of evidence. Now, there's also what we call pattern and model evidence. So this is evidence. I'm going on about evidence a lot because it's really important. Okay, it absolutely is the icing on the cake as far as your bid is concerned. There are different types, as you see here, of what we call pattern and model evidence. Case studies is a strong form of evidence, providing they're written in the right way. So again, you write the case study. You write about a client. You should really be naming that client in the case study. They shouldn't be anonymous. So you have to get that client's say so that yes, that case study is okay, and you can use it in a bidding situation. And the idea is that the requirement within the case study is similar to the requirement of the client that you're bidding to. So there is a pattern, there is a projected pattern, or there's a modelling going on. That's why we call it pattern and model evidence. The same is true of certain procedures that you operate under, and in certain project methodologies that you may adhere to as well. Institutional evidence is the evidence that you have created yourselves without external involvement. And the operative word here, as you can see from the slide, is your. So, you may create certain numbers and data, you may have certain opinions, you may conduct your own customer surveys and create your own policies, but of course they're your documentation. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them. Of course you should use them. The more evidence, providing it's relevant, we'll come to that in a second, the better. But typically objective evidence, so the third party stuff, is normally viewed as more credible than what you've created yourself, because you have the opportunity to manipulate that. Heavens above, I'm sure you wouldn't, but there is always that possibility. CVs. I mentioned when we looked at the answer in the how question, so how are you going to do the work? One of the factors was who's going to do it. So when you think of staffing, when you think of personnel and management and whoever's involved in the project, a CV, or perhaps a series of CVs, if appropriate, is a good way to get across to your client. These are the people that are going to be involved. These are the reasons why, i.e., their experience, their expertise, their qualifications, where that's appropriate. And then you might actually have each of those people say something in the CV, give what we call a personal statement about what they're going to do for the client should you be successful in winning the business. Non-exclusive evidence is the stuff that exists in the marketplace, essentially. So this is information and evidential sources that you can draw upon, but then so can your competitor. So I would say it's a weaker form of evidence. But again, if nothing else is available to you, and there are some examples here, then something's better than nothing. But your competitor may be using the same thing. And lastly, if you're what's called the incumbent, i.e., if you already have the contract, and because if you are an incumbent, the contract will come around for renewal at some point in time, assuming it's not a kind of one-off project, and that might be a year later, it might be 3 years later, it might be 5 years later, depending upon what the requirement and the service is. But if you have been servicing the account over that period of time, then you should have, providing you've done a good job, and we'll make that assumption, you should have a lot of information and a lot of dialogue with the client that you can draw upon over that period of time. And again, I won't go through these in detail, but you can see some examples of what I mean here. So, if you, for just one, if you have produced data that shows how well you performed over the period of the contract, then that may be a year old, but the client will have forgotten about it come the contract renewal. So there's no reason why you wouldn't remind the client of how you performed consistently rather than just how you performed, for example, over the last few weeks or months. So keeping that data, archiving that data is really important come around to contract renewal. So kind of keeping my criminal kind of methodology here with fingerprints, DNA is also, of course, used in a court of law. Again, I'm not sure it's going to be used in a bid, but you get my drift, I think. So the evidence you should provide should be relevant. Now, there's different degrees of relevance, isn't there? So, what services or products are you providing, the sector which the client belongs in, the market in which they operate, and the services that you'll provide. So, the more relevant, the better. But, if you can pick one out of that list, then so be it. There's going to be a degree of relevance there. Recent is good. So, the more recent your case study, for example, you've got case studies that are 3 or 4 years old, they're not going to be as powerful as something that was written in the last 6 months. So the more recent, the better. And again, when you're planning out your bid, and that's one of the recommendations that I made last week, and I spoke about research, for example, in advance. One of the things that you should consider is, well, what are we going to use to make our story stand out and our story more believable? So consider, as part of your planning process, what the evidence is going to be. Now, for example, if you've got 4 weeks to write the bid, if that's the deadline that the client has given you, and you know that there's another client very similar to this one, and you've done a really good job, but you haven't got a testimonial, you haven't written the case study, then if you can get that squared away, at the beginning of the process rather than waiting to the end of the process, then you'll relieve your stress and you'll have enough time to do that as well. So think about it in advance is the recommendation. The last thing we're going to talk about today, which is going to take us up to, as I said, just before 11 o'clock, is the requirement to write in a let's call it a direct fashion. This is, we do a lot of bid reviews. Just bear with me a second, sorry. Just wet the whistle there. We do a lot of bid reviews. I should have, Bid Perfect is a bids intended consultancy. So we provide lots of different bid services, one of which is training, which I'm doing now. Another is bid reviewing. So our client will write a review. Sorry, they'll write the bid, they'll give it to us, we'll review it, and we'll make some recommendations as to how it can be made better. And every bid that I read, without fail, the style of writing is not direct enough. It is lacking clarity. There is a maxim here, you can see it on the screen, less is more, and that's certainly true in any form of written communication, and certainly in the world of bidding. Because your client, the people that are reading the bid at your end, they're going to read yours. Now, depending upon the size of the bid, it might be split up between different people as well. But that person or those people are going to read your bid, but they're also going to read maybe half a dozen others, aren't they, as well? Because this is a competitive process. In fact, there might be, in many cases, there might be a lot more than half a dozen. So we need to make, as part of standing out from the crowd, to go back to this differentiation I mentioned earlier on, discrimination I mentioned earlier on, we need to make their job as easy as possible. We do not want to waste their time, and we do not want to distract them. And providing we take the right approach, which we're about to explore, we will not waste their time and we will not distract them. They're not robots, okay? That was the kind of emphasis from the previous slide. Some of you might recognize this individual. Some of you might be familiar with his work. This is one of the giants of literature. And his name, if you haven't already guessed it, in fact, it's a pen name. His real name, this is one for the trivia, okay? Next time you're in the pub, Hopefully that will be soon, okay, when we're all allowed to use them normally. His name is Eric Blair, but his pen name is George Orwell, okay? And George Orwell, one of his works is 1984. Another one is Animal Farm, which you may be familiar with from your education. It is a book that's used in secondary schools with English literature. Now, Orwell didn't only write books and novels, he wrote papers and essays. And one of his essays is something called Politics and the English Language, which he wrote way back in 1946. And in that work, he described 6 rules for writers. Now, he was talking about writing about politics with the English language, but the rules apply to any form of written communication. And a bid is, of course, a form of written communication. The first recommendation is to never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which are used to seeing in print. Why wouldn't you do that? Because metaphors are or can be cryptic. Your intention, what you meant with the metaphor, may be received differently from the party at the other end. So we want to be absolutely clear in the points that we are making. If you're used to seeing something in print, it becomes what's called a cliche. And I'm going to give you some examples of cliches in a second. And we don't want to write in cliches because they're dull and predictable and boring. Never use a long word, but a short one will do. Because again, this is about clarity. You do not want to confuse your audience. So pick simple, straightforward language rather than overly complex, obfuscating, there's a good word, language, confusing language. If it's possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. We're going to do an exercise on that shortly, okay? Again, one of the reasons for that is it's about clarity, but it's also the fact that in many bids now, you are given a limitation or a limit as to the number of words you can write for an answer, or the number of characters that you can use, or indeed the number of pages that you can use. So the more we're able to get our point across concisely, succinctly, the better we will be. Never use the passive, or you can use the active. I'll show you an example of that in a second, just to confirm what we mean by passive and what we mean by active. Never use a foreign phrase, scientific word, or jargon word if you think of an everyday English equivalent. And again, we do not want to confuse people. So if you use a lot of jargon, and most sectors do, again, that's something that we come across frequently, don't necessarily expect the client to understand your industry jargon. So you've got to explain yourself in simple, everyday language. Now, Orwell does give you a get out. So with number 6, he allows you to break any of the above sooner than say anything outright barbarous, which in itself is an interesting word. I go back to the one above, number 5. So if you were writing for a scientific audience, you would write in scientific language because that would be their expectation. And if you didn't write in that way, then it would look a little strange, to say the least. So if you stick to those half dozen rules, you will become a better writer, an all-round writer, and therefore you will become a better bid writer. Now, one of those rules was never use the passive where you can use the active. Here is an example of the passive. 1984. In fact, that's a spelling error, isn't it? That was on purpose, obviously. I put that in there. I pointed it out to you now because it just popped out on the screen at me, but all of you would have spotted that. We're talking about writing accurately, aren't we? 1984 or 1984 was written by George Orwell, which is the passive, and that is 8 words. George Orwell wrote 1984 is the active. So not only is it more direct, not only I think it emphasizes George Orwell, but it uses 2 fewer words as well, 6 compared to 8. So always write in the passive, always write in the active rather than the passive. I said I'd show you some cliches. Here are a few. In fact, there's one on the screen right now, isn't it? Think outside the box. How many times have we heard that before? I heard it on the BBC. Earlier today, in fact. Some others you may come across from time to time. They're predictable, they're kind of, heard it before, they're a little bit dull. They're using words that, if we're up against the word limit, we shouldn't use, we don't need to use. So avoid cliches is the recommendation. Also, avoid jargon. I've mentioned that already. Americanisms. You are bidding in the UK. You're writing to a UK based business, or perhaps, and certainly if you're bidding to the public sector, Americanisms wouldn't belong. So, you know, keep your Z's, as the Americans would call them, and replace them with, not keep them, get rid of them and replace them with S's. And if you're using the word labour, for example, then of course it would be the U would be included. A word that for the first 30 years of my life I thought was pronounced hyperbole. When you clever, intelligent people know it's pronounced hyperbole, also doesn't belong. So, and there is I thought, a rather good example of hyperbole. My back's killing me. It's not, I have got a bad back, but the prognosis is that it's not going to see me off of this earth, which is a good thing. Random capitalisation. You know, the bid won't be chucked out because you have randomly capitalised. But this is, I go back to the point about including no distractors. People can't become, or some people become distracted by, for example, random capitalisation, or punctuation being in the wrong place, an apostrophe, for example, in the wrong place, or words being spelt incorrectly. It also reflects on your attention to detail, and it reflects upon your professionalism as an organisation. So just, you know, make sure you get it right, get it reviewed by somebody else if you're not entirely sure yourself. And there was a good example of random capitalisation before. This is an easy one. So our good friend Obama didn't quite get it right. It should be will rather than can. So wherever you might have written would, can, or could, write will. If you know you know, if you get the work, you will do something. Let's be positive about it. Let's write will rather than would, can, or could, because the would, can, or could kind of suggest, well, we might do it, you know, if the kind of circumstances are right. If you're going to do it, will is the positive operative word. And again, the one that we see all the time, and again, this is about distractors, and to go back to the kind of golden rule, we don't want to distract, we want to be precise in our writing. So when you're talking about companies and organisations, as an example, these are singular. These are not plural. So in this case, Bid Perfect, there is only one Bid Perfect, there's not another. So it's Bid Perfect is running this workshop, not Bid Perfect are running this workshop. Again, a common mistake, simple to fix, and removes the potential distractor. Okay, I got about 10 minutes and we're right on the money as far as timing is concerned. So I didn't ask you to do this exercise in advance because we haven't got the time for that. But in a larger course, what we do is we give our delegates an example, or this is one of many, but this is one example of what we use, which we describe as heavy writing. And we shouldn't be writing heavily, we should be writing leanly. Okay, so the job is to take the passage of information that you see here. Incidentally, I think I'm right in saying, yeah, that is one sentence as well. There is no full stop until we get to the end, which is a problem in itself because sentences should be around about 20 words as a maximum if you can, you know, kind of take that as a benchmark. But our job is to take this one sentence or one paragraph, rewrite it, use fewer words, and say the same thing. That will then adhere to the requirements of the golden rule. So there's a lot there, isn't there? Here is the version then that you've just been looking at, and that version is 61 words long. As I've said, it's only one sentence. Now, what I've picked out in the sort of amber colour there are the specifics. They are the factors that we must make sure are in the new version because they cannot be argued with. We've got to make sure that we write about some form of charges appraisal process. We can use different words, but whatever words we use must mean the same thing. We've got to the reader must understand in whatever new version we write that we are bidding, in this case, to provide accountancy. The fact that this has been done annually over a period of time, and that period of time is determined, that period of time is 12 years. That's got to be included. We've also must ensure that we include in our new version, our revised version, the fact that we're offering a 3-year agreement And over the course of those 3 years, the costs will be maintained throughout the 36 months, i.e. the 3 years. It's the same, it's the equivalent. So our job then is quite difficult, isn't it, on the surface? We've got to take 61 words, we've got to reduce them by as many as we can, but the new version must say the same thing. We must retain the specifics. Here is my version. My version is now 27 words long. Incidentally, the one that you see at 61 words is from a real bid. I've changed the names, okay, to protect the innocent. I suppose you could call them guilty in this place, but anyway, but it's from a real bid. So this is my rewrite. Now my rewrite is, as you can see, it's 27 words and 56% less. And the factors that I've picked out in green there confirm that I have included all of the key points that I mentioned to you must be included in the new version above. Now, I've also included this format of naming the organisations, so Grommet LLP and Widgets Company Limited. There's no reason why you couldn't remove Grommet LLP and replace it with we, which again would save you a word, wouldn't it? Because there's 2 words that we're using here. We could replace with just 1 word. This would need to be have then, rather than has. And you could also do the same with the other side with the client side. Widgets Company Limited could become your. Now it's it's a less formal style of writing, but that's absolutely fine. Our writing should move, according to the times. We need to write in a contemporary style. It's like, I don't know, typically men, it's normally men anyway, when they're going to the office don't wear ties these days, whereas, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, ties were typically the norm. We don't get dressed up for dinner ordinarily, okay, if we're eating at home. So the same kind of thought process should be applied to the written word. Here are some examples of what we call redundancy. So words that we typically see used together that don't need to be there, or a longer style of writing. On 2 separate occasions, that can be replaced with twice. So 1, 2, 3, 4 words is replaced with 1 on a regular basis. This word basis, again, it's a word, it exists in the English language, but I see it all the time. We hear on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. That can be regularly, quarterly, and annually. They mean the same thing. To take into consideration would become to consider. So we've got, what's that, from 4 words down to 2. We've halved the number of words. Here's some more examples of words where you do see them used together and they don't need to be used together. So this process of scrutiny is to scrutinise, you have to do that job carefully. You can't scrutinise in any other way. So you can remove the careful and just have after scrutiny. If something is foreign, it is imported. If it's imported, it is foreign. So you can use one or the other. You don't have to use them together. So this is good. These are good examples of where we can make our writing much more leaner. And also, again, I go back to the point where we may well be confronted with a word limit. And if we've written 520 words and the limit is 500, then these are great opportunities to get below that word limit without removing any part of that proposition, without removing the kind of, the key elements of what we want to get across. So I'm going to do very quickly a live edit. Okay, I'm in sort of 5 minutes or less than that, 2 minutes. So to show you, to illustrate what it is that I mean. So I need to stop the share because I need to open a Word document. So just bear with me a second, guys. Okay, so now you've always got, here it is. It's always difficult to find the one you want. Right. So hopefully now you can see a Word document on screen. And that Word document is 22 pages long. The chocolate bar on the sandy beach next to the sea at St Ives was melted by the heat of the sun. Our job, as per the previous example, is to say the same thing, but say it in fewer words. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. So here we go. Okay, so we've got the same thing. The first thing that hopefully you will have noticed is this sentence is written in the passive. It is not written in the active. The chocolate bar on the sandy beach was melted. We want to start with the sun. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The sun. And then I'm going to just take this out from the end here and insert it in here. Oops. So the sun melted, and we want the chocolate bar there, don't we? Just going to type it in rather than cut and paste. The sun melted the chocolate bar. Now, do we need the heat? Do we need the heat of the sun? So I'm asking myself the question, but I know you're hearing me. The answer is no. And why is the answer no? The answer is no, because the sun is always hot. The sun is never cold. So there's no specific there that we need to worry about. So we can delete that. So the sun melted the chocolate bar. On the sandy beach next to the sea at St. Ives. The next question that I ask you and myself is, are all beaches sandy? And the answer to that question is no. Some beaches are stony, they're shingle, they've got rocks or whatever. So sandy has to remain. But where are beaches? Where is every single beach in the world found, if you consider a coastal town anyway, like St. Ives? And the answer to that question is next to the sea. Okay, so we don't need next to the sea. So the sun melted the chocolate bar on the sandy beach at St. Ives. Okay, but we can reverse this again. The sun, that should be a capital, by the way, because the sun is a proper noun. The sun melted the chocolate bar on St. Ives, and we have to put an apostrophe there, sandy beach. 22 words in our original. In our new version, we have 11 words. So we have halved the number of words and said the same thing. So when we're editing, when we're writing leanly, when we're writing directly, first of all, look out for passive rather than active writing, and then look out for those words, as I've done there, that don't need to be there. The beach is always next to the sea, so that doesn't need to be there. The sun is always hot, that doesn't need to be there. And then perhaps do a bit of reformatting, and we end up, as we have with this example, of half the number of words, but saying the same thing. I'm going to take you back to the presentation now, and we'll just finish off. And then we'll bring Nowzar back into the picture. Okay, live edit done. So as I kind of started off, what I've just done there in terms of writing leanly, writing accurately, writing positively, writing actively rather than passively, is another differentiator or a potential differentiator. And the reason I say that is the reader is more able to connect with the points that you're making, but pretty much every business that we deal with has a habit of writing in a less direct fashion. So the more your evaluator is able to process the important information that you're giving them, the better the position that you will be in, and they will thank you for it, because as I've said, they've got other bits to read and they've got a day job to do as well. So a 2-minute summary, and then I will hand back to Nowzar. This considers what we went through last week and what we've gone through today. Comply, 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 comply is the recommendation. Make sure that you read the instructions. Make sure that you read the requirements. You know, if they tell you to write in a certain font size, then write in a certain font size. If they tell you to use up to 500 words, make sure that you don't use any more than 500 words. Just make sure, and whatever documentation that they've asked you to supply or tick the boxes of, just make sure that you do that. Okay. If you don't do that, your bid may well be chucked out from the process. I go back to a point I made last week. When they get those, dozen bids maybe in the first instance, and they start to read through them, they're not looking for a winner at that point. They're going through a process, and we describe it as looking for losers, because in most cases they'll create a short list of potential winners. So if you have given them a reason not to be selected, you will go on that pile of losers. So comply, 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 comply. how can you stand out from the crowd? What makes you different? The why, how do you answer the why you questions? Think about the innovative piece that I mentioned to you before. It might be a standard service that everybody provides, but what is it about you or your approach with your organization that is different and therefore better than the competition? Try and, as I said, stand out from the crowd. Even taking the last module that we've done, how you write, how you are lean in your approach, how you're directing your approach might give you some form of differentiation. Focus on the client. Yes, you have to describe the way you're going to conduct the job, the way you're going to do the work, but you've also got to introduce facts and information and a rationale from what you found within their bid documentation and what you've found from within your research as well. So if you like, justify your proposition, why you decided to do it in this way. Your solution needs to be compelling, and in order for it to be that, you need to have answered the so what question. So the client needs to understand the benefits, the increases, the improvements, the reductions, and the savings and the gains, which is the value proposition that they will achieve as a result of working with you. And as I've said, it also needs to be priced correctly, whatever correctly happens to be in your situation and your sector. It needs to be easy to read. It needs to be consistent. There should be no saying one thing in one area and then saying something different in another. And again, as per the previous exercise, it needs to be succinct and therefore easy to evaluate. And on that point, consider where they've published an evaluation criteria. Consider responding. Do respond. Based on that evaluation criteria. And if one hasn't been published, ask the question, when you receive my bid and everybody else's bid, on what basis will you be conducting the evaluation, and see what they come back to you and say, and hopefully use that to your advantage. And lastly, as far as the summary is concerned, make sure that you include as much evidence as you can, providing, of course, it's relevant to the requirement and to the points that you are trying to make more believable. Think again of the examples that we looked at earlier. I think we said this at the beginning, that this is being recorded, so you will get a copy of the presentation as you see it today. And the final golden rule is probably the most important, actually. They're all important, that's why they're golden rules. But the final golden rule is it's not the taking part, it's the winning that matters, because this takes time. There are no shortcuts with bidding. The more, like everything in life, the more you put into it, the more that you are likely to get out of it. So you want to invest that time wisely. And the more wise you invest it, make sure that you select the right opportunities, for example, that are right for your business. The more convincing you are and more compelling you are about your proposition, the more likely you are to experience success. And that is bidding to win in a couple of hours. And that's me. Should you wish to understand more about what it is that we do or how we might be able to help you, you can contact me. You can have a look at our website. You can contact me using the contact information there. And for now, I'm going to stop the share. Bear with me a second, and hand you back to Nowza.
Okay, many thanks, Neil. While I'm putting up the slide, I just want to mention, you mentioned something about using metaphors or not using them. Yeah. And I just realized that in one of the bids that we are putting together, we're using the phrase "hit the ground running." So I'm going to get rid of that and put it into more simple English, more business English.
That's an interesting point. It's a little bit, it is a metaphor. I'd say it's more of a, and I'm not being disrespectful when I say it, it's a bit more of a cliche. We hear it a lot. So yeah, I would just simplify it. Use common phraseology.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. Great. So a few slides here to show you what's essentially coming up next, who's going to be delivering them, what more we have in store for you. So just bear with me a few more slides and then we will end the session. So we've put together this fit to bid program. engagement with procurement. We had a panel session. Neil just completed the 2 bidding sessions, which is on number 4. And what we want to take you through now is a few sessions on your business model. Are you ready to bid or not? Is your business capable? Do you have the right value proposition, which Neil mentioned earlier as well? And we have 40 companies amongst you will be selected for one-to-one advice, which I'll be talking about in a minute as well. So just to recap, many thanks again. The green section, which is Neil's done his 2 workshops. Now we come to the business model one. We've got 4 in July, intensive, 1 a week. And they're all on a Tuesday. So they start on the 6th of July, which is business model, strategy, and innovation. Goes on to value proposition, a design on the 13th. And then you've got presenting to win on the 20th and project management on the 27th. We take a bit of a break in August and we come back in September. So the business model ones, essentially, we're going to work with you, is be interactive as we usually are. We will send you a template in advance. You will work on that template like an exercise and create your own business model. It'll help you to examine your current model and help you to see whether you have opportunities to look at your business. Are you ready to bid? Is your business, yes, we all want to bid, we all want to win more contracts, but can you deliver? Can you supply? Can you make a profit? Those are questions that we're going to ask you. Subsequent to that, we have another session, which is another interactive one where we'll send you a template in advance as well. You work on that at the workshop. It's have you got the right products and services? Are you getting the right jobs to be done? Are you approaching them? Are you launching something you want and trying to win a bid based on that? Or are you meeting your customer requirements? The circular economy and developing key partnerships. This is going to be in September. This is very close to our hearts. It's to do with keeping the business local, making it a bit more sustainable. There is a big emphasis on social value. We'll be talking about that as well. And in order to play in that circular economy and be successful, we've got to develop key partnerships. We can't go it alone. Okay, and it may also be this session will be extremely sort of beneficial for SMEs who want to consider partnering or collaborating and presenting a joint bid. We've got a session in July with Jez Ray. So now you've written your bid, you've submitted your bid, and you might get shortlisted. What happens when you get shortlisted? You need someone like Jez to help you to present yourself, to present your business, and he's fantastic at that. And there is an opportunity there because Jez is an ex DJ. He worked in banking as well, and he also sings at Carnegie Hall in New York. So we are lucky to have him on our panel, and it's going to be a great session. Don't miss it. Then we've got Tony, who look at your bid and your tender process from a project management view. Have you got all your ducks in a row, as it were? Are you doing the right things? Have you got a timeline? Are you looking at your costs? Are you looking at your quality, etc.? Very important session if you want to really submit a winning bid. In September, we've got Janice. When everything sort of comes to an end, as it were, we've got bid funding solutions. So you won a bid, or you want to win a bid, you want to partner with somebody. What are the funding options out there? And Janice is an expert in that. She will take you through that. Okay, so you don't want to miss these. These are extremely, all very, practical, free, and available to you. And a tender business advice, we've got both Charlie and Elsa on the call here today. They can wave their hands if they want to, please. And the one-to-one tender business advice sessions or business advice in general aimed at a chamber members will be delivered by these 2 advisors. Okay, so again, both of them are experts in what they do. Both of them are local and very accomplished, and we look forward to working with you. So just to recap again, 4 sessions. In July, we urge you to register. The events have all been set up on Eventbrite. We will send you the links. to register by tomorrow or by Monday. We'll also send you the recording of both these two webinars by Niels again, and I look forward to seeing you all on the 6th of July. So that's the end of my presentation. Many thanks. Over to you. Over to you, Neil, if you want to say a few words again, please, and just to conclude.
Only to, just a second so I can see you all. Only to say, well, thanks for, I know that it's not very interactive, these sessions, unfortunately, and you've heard a lot from me, so hopefully it's been useful over the two sessions. There's one thing I should add, actually, very briefly. I'm conscious of the fact we're a little bit over the time, but I mentioned at the end there about, I don't know if I use the word qualification, but one thing that I'd recommend you do is make sure that if you're going to write a bid and put the time and effort into it, you need to make sure it's right for you. So that's a process that we call bid no bid. So either you're going to bid it or you're not going to bid it. So you need to ask yourself a series of questions that lead to that conclusion. On our website, there is a tool. It's free of charge. It's called the Bid No Bid Calculator. Visit our website if you want to use it, okay, to understand that qualification process. Aside from that, Nalza, I don't think there's anything in the chat we need to look at, is there, or I don't know?
No.
No? Okay. Unless anyone else has any questions, which you want to ask me right now, I'm happy to deal with any questions, but you might not want to speak in front of everyone. I get that, okay? It's entirely up to you. Silence.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So look, as I said, once again, thank you. You have my contact details should you require further information. Happy bidding. All right. That's what I'm going to leave you with.
Okay. Thank you very much, all.
Thanks, guys.
Good stuff. And we'll see you soon. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye now.
Goodbye.